Yeah, Taoism, Oriental Medicine, martial arts, biochemistry, counseling psychology, a lot of different things. Um, oh yeah, yeah. The conference. Yes. It's a lot of science, actually. Yeah. Yes. Well, you know how things happen. They tend to happen accidentally in life, it seems. I think that initially I actually wanted to go into medicine before I did my counseling psychology degree. I did biochemistry thinking I might go into medicine, and then changed my mind and opted for biochemistry industry. And then as I worked in that field for a while and kept studying Oriental medicine and hypnotherapy, I decided that I wanted to go more in depth into the psychological realm of helping people heal from different kinds of traumas. And of course, it always interests me, the UFO phenomenon and alien abductions and ET contact and all of that, because those kinds of things happened in my family, and I wanted to explore more of that from the psychotherapeutic perspective, and also using regressive hypnosis to find out if we can go deeper to find out what's really happening. Because as maybe many people may know, that in this particular phenomena where people are having maybe alien encounters, abductions, visitations, there's often either missing time or amnesia, and not all the memories are present. And sometimes if they are, then they may be cover memories or screen memories or partial memories. And so sometimes it's hard to actually get to the whole truth behind the phenomena. There seems to be a lot of smoke and mirrors in this field. And that's basically well known. I think the whole X-Files TV show way back, that's actually started in the 90s, was reflective of a lot of the things that I learned in my early studies, and how things happen, and the kind of the spooky phenomena with the military cover-up and the dark side of it all. So I learned that, and I had a support group of my own where I invited people who believed that they'd had alien abductions or military-type abductions, MK Ultra, shamanic initiations, ritual abuse, anything that was unusual or related to, let's say, a non-worldly type of intelligence connection. And so I came to learn a lot about, actually more about the what I call the MILAB phenomena, or military abductions that go along with some of the alien abductions and encounters. And so I think it was a really good learning experience, because when you talk with people privately over time and observe them over time and their patterns of what are the kinds of experiences they're having and their relationships and their family histories, come to learn a lot more than maybe what's on the outer level, what's presented in, let's say, in the community, in the UFO community, or in the alt media, or even with researchers who may be just skimming the top of what is the outer appearance and the symptoms of what's happening versus what's really happening underneath over a period of time, and from what I call the therapeutic perspective. So, and I know that research is very important. So in my early years, I was doing a lot of research, as well as, let's say, the therapy and the hypnotherapy kind of angle. And what I found is that it's more important for the person to have the therapy. I think it's more important long term. And research is good, but research is only as effective as how deep the person has gotten into their own experience and self-understanding of what's really happening. And that can only happen if they go deep enough into their own histories and their own psychological, how they respond and react to trauma, their family histories, what's really happening underneath. So I think that there's an outer level of what people think is happening, and then there's an inner level and a deeper level of what's really happening that may be not known as widely, and people don't really know about it as much, and it's hidden. And I think there's things that are taboo. And certainly when I was starting my research in the 90s, it seemed that in the popular UFO community and a lot of the conferences that people went to, there was almost this peer pressure to view it in a certain way, to view it as a positivist. The ETs are here for our spiritual evolution, and if there's anything negative, it's all because it's the military shadow cabal groups or something like that. And in reality, it's mixed with a lot of things, and it's not really a black and white issue. Although when we go into the media, and it seems like we're thrown into trying to compartmentalize it. It's either this or it's either that. And then if you don't see it according to the politically correct opinion, then you're ousted from speaking engagements or getting your material out. So, and it's interesting because today, I just spoke with a colleague who just attended a conference recently, and the same things were happening in that conference today as they were happening in the early 90s. In terms of the programming being imputed upon the people to only perceive the ETs as a mostly positive experience, and that if they do have negative memories, well, it's most likely false memory syndrome, and everybody needs to be on this happy-go-lucky, well, we have to see the aliens on a positive note, and if you say anything negative, well, it's because there's something wrong with you, or it's only a military element, it's not really the aliens. So right. I was actually shocked that what we're seeing here is nothing has really changed in terms of the programming to cover up so much of what I think is the real connections and the real elements that actually are responsible for this phenomena.
Yeah, there seems to be a very divided UFO research community out there, like the old New Agey, like you said, side of it, like all positive ETs with, Stephen Greer and others. And on the other side, the old negative one, like Davy Jacobs and others, and but in his dimension, there seems to be a lot of deception from all angles, all sides of the equation. You've based your work upon Barbara Bartholic and Karla Turner's work, right? And also Corrado Malanga, whom I interviewed once.
Oh, good. Yes, it's amazing, and I feel very grateful that I learned from Barbara Bartholic and Karla Turner, although I only met Karla Turner, I think, once when she was at her last lecture in San Diego. But I really liked her work because she was bringing out things that a lot of my clients were starting to tell me about, and things that I had learned privately through other people, and even in my own life, that was being discussed on a different level. And whereas most people just kind of keep it on a research level, and they're not really allowed to talk about this, and they just want to get the evidence, but there's so much more going on that I'm so glad that I was able to correspond with Barbie while she was still alive and learn a lot from her about the deeper aspects of really the whole alien love bite thing. Obviously, she was the one who helped me recognize that, and if it really hadn't been for Barbie and also Karla's books that she wrote, I may have been stuck in, misery and suffering and may not have gotten out of what I was involved in. So I really owe my gratitude and honor to those researchers who helped me.
Great. Can you tell us briefly what type of hyperdimensional interference patterns you've come across? What they are exactly, how they manifest mentally, physically, psychically, and what forces, energies, entities interact with those humans who experience those things. What kind of frequencies or dimensions they come from, and where are they from, really? Can you explain? Just
That's a
briefly. I know it's
because,
a long topic to explain, go over.
in fact, we did, several colleagues and myself had done 2 panels, web discussions on those topics. One of them is called Hyperdimensional Interference and the Keys to Discernment.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really good for explaining, let's say, an overview of the hyperdimensional interference. What we're calling hyperdimensional is really maybe interdimensional beings or things that are unseen, but they still are very perceptible in oftentimes a paranormal or a synchronistic way or even a supernatural way, or sometimes it's very overt. Um, but it'll happen, let's say, on a macro scale. What's going on in the world on a macro scale? How is this interfering on a macro scale on a worldly way? And then how is this interfering with us that we can recognize in our own interpersonal lives and in our dream life? And what are things, how do we know when that's happening? So that was actually a good discussion because we're able to come from, let's say, an overview of first understanding this from a macro level in terms of what's really been going on in our world history, human history for a very long time by hyperdimensional forces, or let's say the ancient gods, the demigods, the mythical figures from ancient past, and how they figure into what we're seeing today with some of the aliens and the ETs and the Anunnaki and the secret societies and these interdimensional beings, supernatural beings that may interfere or link with certain human groups, and then they may interfere in certain ways to carry out certain functions of power and control in this world. Or perhaps, I mean, my theory in my book, The Love Bite, this was more about how is this happening in our interpersonal love relationships, and how, let's say, aliens were putting people together in these bonding scenarios, people who knew that they were having ongoing alien encounters over their life many times, and they were set up, right? These love relationships, but certain dynamics occurred which were very traumatic, created a lot of drama, emotional highs, crashing lows, bizarre, supernatural. It's all in my book, okay? So I guess, I don't know how to make a long story short, but there's ways that this is occurring on a personal, let's say, romantic, sexual relationship level, and then also on other levels in our lives, which may have to do with hyperdimensional interference, depending on what level it's playing.
Right.
And what it's playing.
So yeah, in your book, you talk about the this whole archetypal hierarchy of demonic creatures, aliens, ETs, and interdimensional beings, and there's a real hyperdimensional manipulation of mankind, and there's a real spiritual warfare out there, a real harvesting going on from like 40 service to selves, ETs and demonic entities, and humans are like seem to be the hosts, or the sheeps, the cattle, and some are agents. Can we say this is all like a dark matrix that's being run by a hierarchy that we never get to see, while most of us don't?
So yes, I mean, I think I've met actually Tom Montauk and came across his work actually many years ago, and this might have been around the time I got my first book published, The Love Bite. But even before that, we started noticing, so we would go to these support groups and we would try to discuss, the weird things that were happening in our lives. Many of us had, let's say, alien abductions or encounters throughout our lives, and we'd have these like weird dreams where they're like the abduction dreams or the MyLab dreams or what we call the virtual reality scenarios, and you're always wondering, wait, did this really happen, or is it happening on this other dimensional level? So as we were exploring more deeply, really wanting to go below, let's say, the cover story of what the UFO community is saying, or mainstream, which is basically nothing, or nothing of value to what's really happening, right? So as we went deeper to explore, and especially working with people in a hypnotherapeutic process, for example, then we started noticing, quote, the spiritual warfare and the interference patterns. So as we get closer to the truth, wanting to explore what's really happening, then that's when all the weird stuff started happening, and what I call the hyperdimensional interference and the spiritual warfare attacks. The technology's breaking down, the phone's going dead, being followed, by spooky military, whatever. I mean, it was the whole 9 yards of interference on many different levels. And so with the people who had what I call the military abduction histories, or MK Ultra, or they were in some kind of what I call the Illuminati bloodline families, or some kind of secret space program people, for example, and they tended to have the more heavier interference patterns where they were followed and watched, sometimes on a more overt level, let's say with the black helicopters and, weird phone calls and, people visiting you at your door and giving you threats, all kinds of things. So those kinds of things occurred, which certainly was a message that we're hitting some, sensitive issues here, which are national security secrets, or they're trying to play psyop games so that we, follow the red herrings and we think we're important, we think we're chosen or special, which the ETs will do to people. They will do things like activate their egos to make them, maybe get involved in channeling, or think they're special, and they carry out a certain mission. They go on this whole ego trip, and it's just another game, which
and
luckily...
healing as well, right?
Oh,
they
sure.
They get healed. I did a whole thing, event regarding healings, ET healings.
Yeah, too. In fact, there's a case in, I think it's in the Dark Side of Cupid book, where it was actually an early case of Barbara Bartholic's, which she gave me, and it was a case of a woman who was taken, and I think it was the Mary Henry case. It's in the Dark Side of Cupid, where she was taken and had missing time on her way to work, and she had like really bad arthritis or something in her hands, osteo, it was like misformed and painful. And then she had a missing time, a classic abduction, but when she came back, her hands were healed. And so she had an initial regressive hypnosis to find out initially what happened on one level with these beings she met and how they healed her hands. But as she went deeper, more of the seduction and the illusions and the deceptions were more apparent as a deeper study of her case, which is really why I put it in there, because it showed the whole spectrum. She was like a poster child of the whole spectrum of a lot of times what happens from what appears to be benevolent healing, and then you go deeper and deeper, and you find that this was just part of the situation, and they did it to get her cooperation, to make them think that they were not to be feared. But in the long run, they were all part of this massive deception scheme that was linked in with a lot of really dark stuff.
Right.
So these were the kinds of things that we wanted to explore, to get down to the root of what was happening, not just the surface level of, the appearances of how wonderful these beings are. And then more often than not, I discovered there is a dark side to this, which people don't like to hear about. And so it's not a popular opinion, but I think it's worth exploring, to be honest about, what the truth is, without holding on to wanting to believe either way. Is just exploring this deeply with an honesty, and with letting go of the egotistical need for approval, or to get views on YouTube, or to get clients, or to get speaking engagements, or to be popular. So you really have to let go of all that to go deeper, because sometimes you find out things you don't want to, or you'll be tested with a lot of interference. So one of the reasons why we did that panel was to show many different perspectives, not just, let's say, somebody who has alien abduction history or studies that, but people on the panel, for example, all their different experiences on different levels of how this hyperdimensional interference takes place, and how it may act out in their life and what they did about it, so that we can come to an understanding of the breadth and the depth of this, and how and why it works the way it does. So, and I think it's useful, because unless we get deep into our own self-inquiry process of who we are and what our issues are, what our real memories are, what our real histories are, we really can't get to the truth of what the phenomenon is. So what I think is happening is there's this upper level of the surface level of the appearance of things that people think is what's real, and the research level. but I don't think they go deep enough into the personal histories and the psychotherapies and the deep uprooting of, let's say, people's personal histories of deep trauma, such as very often, let's say in the dark side of Cupid, were these like heavy-duty love bite situations where it was very profound and a lot of unusual things happened. It was very traumatic and very unusual. If you go deep, usually in one or both people's histories, they do have a history of deep trauma that they may actually be in an MK Ultra program. They may have had ritual abuse histories or family lines that are connected to some kind of high-level, what I call bloodline, blood oath in their ancestry, where they're part of a cult group, a high-level occult group, or they are a specific genetic line that's been watched. And so there's certain beings that will always watch certain people in those lines and try to interfere so as to co-opt people who actually have certain types of abilities that are above and beyond what we see in the normal population. So there are certain bloodlines that are actually watched and cultivated and tweaked by these beings, and they will try to control and exploit and use these people for their own purposes. But many of them actually wake up and say, hey, wait a minute, I don't know if I agree with all this going on. They're going to do what they want to do and go against the program, and understanding what the programming really is. And then once you do that, you may find yourself under a lot of hyperdimensional warfare until you get to the root of what the real programming is and become more sovereign from the control system.
Right.
And that's when you realize how deep the control system is and how deep the rabbit hole goes.
Right, and it goes way back, and it goes, from the genesis of human beings, basically on this planet, right? Do you get sometimes memories that are being brought up from the past, from this past history of mankind, and how humans were created genetically?
Yeah, and I think there was many different prototypes of types of human beings and different genetic prototype combinations. And it's not just how it was in the Bible. The Bible is very metaphorical, but it's also historical, but it's also corrupted and infected by the same sources that want to use humanity. So, I mean, there's truth and there's also spin-controlled truth. But what I'm interested in is people who, if they can go deep enough in their own recovery and inquiry process of going into what I call their soul memory, their deep spiritual memory of being, not just past lives, but if they can go deep enough into that core essence, many of them actually have memories of the ancient past. And then we'll come across maybe a different view or something that actually confirms things that are not very well known, but that their memories, basically there was maybe an original race, and that original race got hijacked and then, genetically modified and controlled over time. So there are some, what I call originals, that are still part of an original, you can call it a bloodline, but this is what I discovered through certain people who I work with, who come to me. And I will give you an example, and the example would be like the high-level Illuminati bloodline families who are from powerful bloodlines where, let's say, the women are considered starfire priestess bloodline. They have an extraordinary degree of what I call clairvoyant, supernatural, psychic abilities, healing abilities, ability to create reality, magical abilities. And so there's certain ones who have better memories of their ancient past through many different lifetimes to see how this played out over time in different incarnations, and how they were trapped over and over again, sometimes by similar bloodline families. So there is something there where there was, let's say, an original, more evolved human, actually. And then that was hijacked by some others who interbred, and then they wanted to exploit those abilities and then use those abilities for their own. And they actually downgraded. What I believe is humanity actually got more downgraded and dummied down. But there still are some people who retain those original qualities, and then those people are hunted down they're hunted down. and they are usually try to control and manipulate and mind control these people so that they can, these hyperdimensional beings who are working actually on the upper levels, so that they can control and exploit and harvest those people and what they produce for them. So it is kind of like a farm here.
Right.
It's just trying to see how far this rabbit hole goes, and what are they doing to harvest people, and how are they deceiving us with many different belief systems and secret, let's say, societies and cult groups, and why are some people, hunted down more than others. And I actually studied the ancient Gnostic material as well as other things to try to get a feel for, why are some things happening to some people but not to others.
Right.
And there's obviously, if you've studied the alien abductee population, you will find that a lot of them are unusual, very unique people. Sometimes they have unusual abilities. They're all relatively psychic, okay? And they may have unusual medical allergies or symptoms or blood types. And so, they are a unique line of people. And so I think they've been genetically modified over time, but there still is original qualities from the original highly evolved human. I don't even know if I want to call it a human. Some people call it an original goddess line that was androgynous, actually.
Okay.
And then so there's certain qualities that have these abilities, these high supernatural abilities and memories. So they not only have memories, but they have ability to create reality more profoundly than, let's say, normals, if you want to use a word for it.
Right.
So these are the ones that are hunted down by certain bloodlines and cult groups. And so they find themselves born in these families, and then it takes a while for them to wake up. So what I find amazing is some of them are like these amazing spiritual gems of people who are beautiful, pure-hearted, very talented, very smart, very sensitive, and then they'll be born in families where the majority of the family members are like these awful reptilian-hosted, psychopathic people or parents. And they've been thrown into these parents and these families, and maybe a MK Ultra program, but for some reason they just they couldn't be controlled like the other members were just so easily controlled and taken over.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So we're seeing that, which is like, that tells me there's something there that has been tried to be hijacked and exploited and controlled over time by these secret groups.
Right.
So there's something real and very good that they're actually trying to exploit. So I don't want to put a label and say that all people from these, quote, bloodline families are evil, or they're part of a secret society where they're all like bad, and that a lot of them are actually wonderful, innocent people who found themselves in these situations, and they remember their histories over many lifetimes, and they remember how they actually got trapped here from ancient, like maybe from Lyra, for example, or even before the Earth's matrix grid was put on and created artificially.
Okay.
Before there was all this genetic downgrade stuff going on. So those are the people I'm interested in, because they have more memory of what's really happening and more perception of what's really happening. And it's usually not necessarily the storyline of what we're being told by the popular players.
When do you get the information that the artificial grid was turned on this matrix?
I think it's very ancient, and that's actually something that you may want to interview one of my colleagues, knows more detail based on her own memory.
Okay.
Her name is Laura Leone, and she may have talked about it maybe in some of her web panels and the hyperdimensional interference.
Right.
But in the beginning, there was like more of an organic timeline, more of an organic, free-spirited kind of being. And then it's like an invasion, infection that occurred that hijacked some of these qualities and genetically downgraded them, so that, and then an artificial overlay put over the Earth, so that artificial timelines were created, and that perceptions, even our own perceptions of what we think reality is, including how we perceive the world and the stars and everything, is actually manipulated because it's tweaked into this grid matrix overlay. So even our perceptions, even in our body, even in our eyesight, has been distorted. Both. This kind of goes into the studies that some people have found in, let's say, the ancient Gnostics knew about this, and they had their own terminology that they used in terms of what they called, the archons and the demiurge and the Yalta-Baoth and Sophia, and the archons. There's many different archons and lower beings of the lower eons of the world, which has become like a matrix control system. And we're trying to actually free Sophia and our own selves from this demiurgic archontic system. So I think the matrix overlay is part of that. It's like an artificial mind technology kind of intelligence interface. So how they describe things is very similar to what we're starting to see in terms of even in Carlos Castaneda's work, like the Dawn Walk series, all those, where they talked about the foreign installation in our mind, the mind parasites, and how it causes us to, even our own minds and our perceptual system, is part of the infection and the foreign installation itself, which has to do with the whole demiurge and how we've been actually hybridized to be a combination of this whole demiurgic overlay even in our soul body. And it gets complicated, but from what the Gnostics described, it's very similar to the experiential process of people who start to wake up and they start to see how this is playing out on all these different, what I call hyperdimensional levels. And so it's really trying to get your pure perception back of your original essence and to be able to identify when that mind parasite starts interacting and invading, infecting your consciousness or someone else's consciousness in the world, so that you can kind of navigate around that and be able to identify and start having discernment of what's really happening. And so this is really where the rubber meets the road, because in my work, I originally started with doing, let's say, alien abduction research, UFO, ufology, what's happening with people's experiences, more on that level, and even the medical aspects like the implants and what they're doing to our bodies, and the babies and the hybrids and all that. But as I did more research, I'm finding that what's really important is how do we regain our purity of perception to bypass the illusions that are being done all around us and to us by these hyperdimensional beings who are running the show, and by our own kind of getting lost in the drama of it all. And so it's more important for me it's like, how can we identify this parasitic infection, this archontic mind parasite? How does it reveal itself in us, in our relationships, in our world, in others, in behaviors? And so really, I got a good education by actually the alien love bite scenario and the dark side of Cupid, with people who, let's say, are these energy vampires, or it's like there's an interdimensional being that's working through them as a host, right? So they're hosting some kind of archontic mind parasite that's feeding on our energy. It's really the sexual energy more than anything else, but it could be emotional energy too. And so it's identifying all those behaviors and things that happen by when the parasite is present, how does it manifest itself? So that we can perceive, okay, the parasite is present when these kinds of things happen, and it feels like this, and these are the dynamics of the relationship or whatever. And so you learn like parasitic behavior and how intelligent they are and how they use people as hosts and what happens during that process, and identifying it so that you can get out from under it and not be, let's say, a victim to that. Because a lot of, my own experience and learning was how I became a victim to this, or felt like I was a victim to this, growing up in a family where unusual things happened and falling into these like alien love bite scenarios, and then, several, and then figuring out what that's really about and how to get out from under that by truly understanding the phenomena. So, and that's kind of a difficult place to be because it takes going deep and it takes uncovering traumas and really uncomfortable experiences. But I would say that what the Gnostics knew is absolutely right on, and I think was revealed in some of these, even in the Carlos Castaneda series, they were right about a lot of it. Although I think there was an infection in terms of the main guru, namely, I think it was Carlos Castaneda, and this was probably presented as fiction. But even if you look at what happened in the original cult, right? And in Amy Wallace's book, where it's The Sorcerer's Apprentice, I think it was the name of the book. And she knew him personally. She had a love relationship with him over time, was involved in the group. And when you read that book, and you look at the dynamics of that cult group and the leader and the sorcerer and his behaviors and the kinds of things that happen, this is like classic energy vampirism, narcissistic path, like the psychopathic kind of stuff, and the interdimensional interference and the predation. So it told me, okay, whatever happened to that group, they got infected, okay, most of them got taken over. Though the truth in these books. I think it's both, actually. It's both happening, and you can't deny that, we do create a reality. We are creators. And so what we create is through essentially what we're believing on really deep levels. And any emotional energy that's trapped through amnesia or trauma that hasn't been fully brought to the awareness to be released can be fuel to keep recreating certain patterns. And that's true. It's a type of karma. But I think that there's certain New Age gurus and beliefs which will hold on to those ideas in a way to blame the victim so that they can hide how they create an easy prey, a planet of easy prey. Okay, so for example, in some religious belief systems, or let's say cultural belief systems, they'll want you to be like, I don't want to use the Catholic Church as an example, but it's so good. Like the guilt trips, and you need to live in poverty and be a martyr and, do all this good and turn your other cheek and, give to all these poor people. And then so when you try to be like the super good nun or whatever it is, you just get like totally eaten by all the predators. You get completely abused and you get eaten up, and it's like things don't work. Okay. The martyr program does not work, and that makes you a worse victim. Okay. So there's a lot of people that have come to me who've had, let's say, the dark side of Cupid relationships, or they might have been in practicing yogis, in these, like a high-level spiritual practitioner, and they're getting hit over the head by these like predatorial beings, and they can't understand why. They're doing all the right things, and they're giving, and it's like that's not how it works. Like, you have to have, this is the thing, I don't know how to explain it. You have to have the purity of perception in your spiritual being, because you're so connected to it that you're going to be able to notice someone, let's say, who comes into your life, let's say somebody who's going to be a lover, or somebody you work with, or a friend, and if you're really connected to your spiritual nature in truth, you're going to be able to know and sense what these beings are, like if they're a predator, okay? And someone who's not truly in touch with their true spiritual essence because they're believing something else, or they're believing a religion without true connection, then they're going to get hit over the head and completely deceived by a predator, and they may end up eaten alive by these predator beings. And then the predator beings will turn around and make it their fault, and then shame you for being a stupid victim because you didn't see it coming. And so there's a certain type of what I call, it's the reptilian shame and blame the victim. They create the problem, okay? They create the problem in society so that you're an easy victim. And then when you get victimized, they turn around and shame and blame you, and then they will create let's say a solution to the problem to throw you back into to be easily exploited. So they create the problem reaction solution in our world so that we're always easy prey for the predators, including the religious belief systems, which tell you, well, you have to always give to every beggar that comes across your path. You always have to practice kindness and compassion, and then you get, used. You get completely used by emotional vampires, predators, liars, and cheaters. And it's like, well, how come I couldn't see that coming? Well, you have to ask yourself, why couldn't you see that coming? So what are we believing in our belief systems, the religions, that are just giving us, let's say, a bunch of rules of behavior? Let's call it the 10 Commandments or the Bodhisattva vows or whatever it is. And you follow it blindly just by believing it and memorizing it and try to practice everything. But if you're not connected to your spirit through true realization and true purity of perception, you will not see what's coming. And you will not be able to notice these predators who are really, really good at what they do. And they will hit you over the head, and they could kill you. So you have to ask yourself, this is what I had to ask myself. Wait a minute, I was trying to do all the right things and study all the right spiritual teachings and practice yoga and practice this and practice that. And I was just being eaten alive by these predators who couldn't give a damn, who are complete and utter psychopaths, who are run by these like dark level interdimensionals, or they're completely taken over because they're nothing more than puppets for some archontic mind control program, and they don't change. You see, the predators and the psychopaths, they are not likely to change. Therefore, if you want to change your life, you have to change. And so that means learning how to perceive correctly and learning how to set boundaries so that you don't run into these anymore and they don't use you as easy prey. And your religions are just going to throw you back into the trap. A lot of them will. Oh yeah, and the blame all on the humans. I mean, this was something that actually James Bartley and we might have brought this up in different interviews where talking with alien abductees who were pulled onto the ship, and then they were put into these, let's say, virtual reality scenarios where the aliens or whoever were playing that role were showing them disasters and different things, and then turning around and blaming them and the humans for doing all these horrible things. And then they would get into this whole guilt trip thing and feel like they have to save the world and get on this mission, when these beings are just manipulating them to feel all guilty, to think it's all humans' fault. But when you really study what's happening, and the interdimensional interference levels and the what I call the interdimensional handling that's happening, they're just playing us and then blaming the victim so they can continue predating because they're feeding off of us. So we have to learn how not to be dumb victims by learning how to set boundaries and see clearly and not getting caught up into those traps. And in fact, I was just reading some of Malanga's work which I have a lot of old things on my files about Dr. Corrado Malanga's findings in his research with alien interference and abductions and the different kinds of, he calls them the alien parasites, which it's actually a very accurate way of viewing the phenomena, where some are, let's say, aliens with bodies, the corporeal aliens with bodies in different forms they take. And then there's the ones that he calls the incorporeal beings, who they may take a form astrally, but their true essence is more like a black shadow or like a, what he calls the looks. He calls it the looks being, and it's actually a very bright ball of light that can go into your solar plexus or different parts of your energy body, and then it will act like a spirit guide. But one of the things that he mentioned in there, I thought it was hilarious, is that this looks being will act like a spirit guide and always try to get you to feel guilty about something. So just think of all the religions where it's like they always throw this big old guilt trip on you, and think about like the biggest hindrance to anybody's recovery in terms of trauma resolution, or if you've been a victim to something like sexual abuse, is like the guilt and the shame and the unworthiness you feel, you know? And so when you look at some of these beings and what they're doing, they're actually trying to make you stay feeling guilty and unworthy and all shameful so they can continue using you as a resource for their predation, you know, so they can censor you and, you know, do what they do. Yeah, in fact, I think it was the same case in the Dark Side of Cupid I mentioned. Maybe I named her Mariah or Mary something, but she had a experience where I think she had a near-death experience where she had an out-of-the-body thing where she fell off of a tree, and then when she went out of the body, she saw a particular being who was like one of the same beings that actually abducted her later in life. And then there was also an incident when she was on a dentist chair with anesthesia where she had an out-of-the-body experience during that anesthesia, and then met one of the same beings that was the same kind that abducted her years later. Okay, so these beings that may, let's say, abduct you in life, sometimes they're with you your whole life or even other lifetimes. And you may see them, let's say, after life or after death, and then they may do the same thing until you wake up. So I think that there is some kind of entrapment going on, and I don't want to say that every single spirit that we see is an alien. I mean, maybe it really is a spirit or someone who's passed on, because that does happen. It's just how do we maintain our lucidity so that we get broadsided and end up in this labyrinthian trap of getting recycled. And I remember talking with people who were recycled even in a more technological way, where they were, let's say, they were in a space program in Russia, let's say in the 70s, and then died. And then because they were in a program that was already linked up with occult, what I call the occult agreements of entrapment and high technology, then that means everybody who works for that company, they're under some kind of agreement, whether they know it or not. And she was literally recycled through technology to come back. And that was like that, they trapped her there. And so what's interesting is a lot of my labs today, they actually have other lifetime memories of being involved in Nazi Germany, or they were, let's say, the high-level families. And then they came back as my labs, in these secret space programs. So I think that there are, this is what we came to learn later, right, through certain quantum healing methods, where there's what I call the agreements of entrapment that may occur, let's say, in other lifetimes or through family members that got us involved in secret projects like the secret space program, for example. And so if agreements have been made on these levels, then they have the permission to turn around and recycle you for their own agenda. So the Nazi agenda is repeating and is still going on today under all these other hidden ways. That yeah, it's amazing how. But that's why when people come to me with say all these things, they're saying, "Oh, I'm being targeted. I'm a target individual, and I think I've got like one of these love bite things." And so, what I do is, I have a questionnaire that they can fill out. If they think it's more alien, and then I have to ask them the questions. Does this occurring in your family, or how well do you know your history? And a lot of times the markers for MK Ultra are present, but they don't even know the depth of their own involvement. All they know is these weird things start happening more and more, and it's basically a lot of times it's a marker for earlier abuse that has not come to the light of awareness or some kinds of mind control programming. Although now, working with people, I see that things are they're more well hidden because of, I think, the technologies now. And I think that as long as it's kind of hard to explain, trauma is actually the foundation of spiritual disconnection. So it's actually deliberately done to us through families and through those who are run by like these higher level beings that are basically feeding on us, right? So they will traumatize people in a systematic way in their life so that these trauma splits and dissociation occurs. And then once that happens, that lays the foundation for these beings to parasite in or control on many levels, or directly mind control, depending on how severe. Like if it's a ritual abuse family where, high level Illuminati bloodline and they go to rituals and they're like heavily involved, then you have like maybe the more overt families where you see those histories more clearly. But in a lot of the people, they're born in a family and there's no overt cult connection, but they have all the systematic traumas and the interdimensional interference and traumas, which basically do the same thing. And so they may be in a project, but it's not as overt. But there's always some kind of interdimensional connection, an agreement of entrapment, and systematic trauma in some way that got them to be exploited in that way. So that's how it really works. Yes. Yes. No, that's an interesting thing. You made me remember something. It's I don't know if I should tell you, but it's a metaphor because these are some of the things that we talk about in private conversations where we think that the timeline is being manipulated, or oftentimes in abductions, it's not always physical. Sometimes they take your energy body or your astral body, and then they put you in a clone or a copy or another dimensional reality. They use you as an asset because of certain abilities or what maybe the active alien memory. That's a scientist, and then they use that part, switch it back, and then plop you back in your body. And so sometimes you have memories of these things and they just seem like funny dreams, but oftentimes they just completely wipe out your memory. And I think they have ways of completely wiping out your memory, or even tweaking the timeline so that it's like it's being relooped over and over again. And then only some people are like waking up to see, wait a minute, this happened before. They're literally relooping the timeline over and over again so that they can prevent as many people from waking up as possible, like these manipulations of the timeline. And so some people are actually waking up to it and remembering it. But if you do, then they will harass you even more. So most people don't know. So most people, I think, are more easily conditioned to believe the mind control, so that they are self-regulating systems of mind control, and they're not a problem. And I would say that the majority are in that category. and it's actually the few who are actually waking up to realizing, wait a minute, they just tweaked the timeline again, and I'm remembering this is the deja vu, and they did this before, and they've been doing this for a long time. And so you really have to be aware and really start looking at things. And so when you have hyperdimensional interference, sometimes it's because it's your own unresolved stuff. Okay, so there's a segment of people who may come to us, they're saying they're being targeted, and then they're definitely having things happen. But then you may notice that they're exhibiting what I call, let's say, borderline personality disorder. And from the psychological literature, that would be a pervasive personality disorder from early trauma and early developmental stages that creates a type of syndrome of personality. So sometimes that's happening, and it's because they haven't resolved enough of their trauma to reduce the drama in their life, and they don't know they're actually creating a lot of this. So you could say the karma thing and the self-creation is part of that. But then there's some people who get the targeting for an entirely different reason. And it's because they have actually woken up more, and they're considered a danger to the ones who are trying to keep everybody asleep. Does that make sense? Well, yeah, I think possession is a real issue. And I think partial possession would be where someone notices, let's say, an interference of a particular being in and out of their dreams, or maybe they feel it in their bodies, but it's not always there. It kind of comes and goes. Or they feel it around their, let's say, their partner that they're having relations with, and there's an entity, let's say, running their partner, and then that entity links into them as a result of being close to this partner. And then it could invade in their dreams, invade in their lives from there on out. And it would be what I call creating an infection of interdimensional interference, but it's not full possession. But the being may come in and out. Like people in the Dark Side of Cupid book, there's examples where their partner was either a full-on possessed host or someone who was partially possessed. Them are actually partial possessions where the entity, let's say it's a reptilian or a snake-like being appearance, will overshadow them a lot of times during sex, for example, or at other times, or when they're drinking. Say when they get really drunk, then they get completely taken over by the entity. And then you will see like partial possessions kind of situation. But in the full-on possessions, that's more serious, and that's bad when that happens. And they don't change, and they're not likely to come for help. And a lot of times they know exactly what they're doing, and they will play predator games and that kind of thing. So I think I even wrote, there's some articles way back in the history of my website. The Birth of a Host was one of them, written by a colleague way back in like 2000. And there might have been some other ones on how to identify it when there's, let's say, reptilian technology coming into their bodies. There was a woman I interviewed whose husband was he was a narcissist, and they weren't getting along well, and he was going to these strip clubs for a period of years, as well as drinking alcohol. And when he would go to these strip clubs, he would basically got infected by the entities and the reptilian technology that was linked into these like strip clubs. And the woman found out because she was a really good clairvoyant, but there was more involved in, let's just say, entities that drive a lot of compulsive behaviors. Sometimes they drive alcoholics or drive sex addicts, but this was actually a technology that facilitated the reptilian possession situation. So it's the whole interview that talks about how her husband became more and more possessed by a reptilian entity, because that's how she perceived it, as this iguana-like thing, but then it would overshadow his body like during sex, and then it would like move in and out, and it was actually linked in through technology. So I would just refer people to that article. I think it's called UFOs, Strip Clubs, was a couple of interviews by someone, and it showed, let's say, the architecture in certain buildings where it was hooked up to that they were able to perceive clairvoyantly. So I think there's actually technologies that facilitate that now through architecture technologies, and even now with the computer and with cell phones and the frequencies they use is actually facilitating more of an interference pattern. And that's actually quite dangerous, because there's people who let's say they're into porn and they do porn compulsively on the computer, and you could literally get possession issues just from the porn addictions themselves. And James Bartley had clients over the years talk about things like this. It's in one of his earlier papers, I think, Understanding the Reptilian Mind. I mean, we get private people who tell us things. They would never come out in public to say this happened, but basically they're noticing some really strange things from porn addictions and the reptilian dreamscape manipulation. People who've got, let's say, methamphetamine, crack addiction over time, where they opened up portals and interdimensional windows were open to these beings, basically jump right in, and then a real possession takes place, and they may stay that way. And sometimes you can tell just by looking at them, they've got something in there.
Right.
So that definitely happens, and there are windows and ways in which those things happen more readily. So it's all the more reason to have precautions in your relationships, and let's say taking recreational drugs, porn addiction. That's a big one. And so, I mean, I had someone correspond with me who was a ritual abuse survivor who got into the sex working industry, which is really part of the programming in trauma, right? Because that's what you program them for anyway. And then getting multiple infections of interdimensional beings as a result, like partial possession, and then abductions by, let's say, the white, was it the white Draco type? There's a white snake type. They're like really powerful, and they may, have these beings inside of them. So there's different, what I call the astral parasite type of phenomena that will happen with different behaviors.
Right.
So we discovered that with, the dark side of Cupid, the love bite thing, and people who were involved with, let's say, gurus or cult leaders or sorcerers who were involved with the darker elements, getting infected with really unusual kinds of phenomena, like snake-like beings inside of them, like as if they laid eggs inside of them, and these eggs hatched these like snake-like astral beings and tentacles and Medusa-type entities, strange things like that.
I came across an article someone sent me over on Facebook regarding a alien egg porn trend in porn movies, that they show insert alien eggs inside the actresses. Which is like totally nuts. This is like a new trend in the porn industry. I don't know if you've heard about that, but I saw that article. I was like, damn, what is this all about now? It's like totally direct. It's meant to harvest sexual energy, but with this alien egg fashion, and also alien tentacles or something. Inserting the actresses, and you said this is like a. This is not even hidden from the real true agenda behind it. I mean, those parasite type beings. I'm showing the pictures that you sent me. The drawings and the pictures.
You'd have to describe it.
Right. There's one where you see a close up of a face, a weird. A deformed face.
Snake one? The baby snake one?
I don't know. It looks like some type of. Anyway, I'm not sure what it represents, but anyway, maybe you can go over some of the pictures that you sent me.
Okay.
If you still have them on your computer, or in the email you sent me. But
this work. Yeah.
Right.
These artists.
Right, artist work, and there's one that seems to be a real, shot of some creature or something that's totally, looks like the Elephant Man or something.
Yeah, Yeah, I'm not sure which one you're looking at, but there's different ones that have been observed
Right.
in, if you go through deep regressive hypnosis. These are the ones that Malonga's artist was able to do, like he called them, the Oris Ra was like one of the head honcho types that had the hook nose, bird nose, with kind of like a third eye thingy and a little bit of a strange thing on his chin and this cowl neck thing, and then these protuberances on the shoulders that they used to think were like wings, but this is just part of their structure. And that was a chicken-like body that it would take to interact with us. And they were, a higher hierarchy being from what he called another universe, or like a dark universe. And they took on that form to interact. And then there was the six-fingered Nordic that had the Star of David that would wear this medallion. And then the looks being, and of course, there's many different kinds of grays, and the reptilian, saurian, amphibious ones. There's a lot of different beings that are reported, and I guess, it could go on and on at infinitum into the types of creatures seen. Like there's cockroach beings, there's ant beings, there's fish people, there's so many different kinds that people report. There's like, tentacled ones, like these Medusa ones. One of the clients saw a Medusa type of thing, or it's like a Medusa, and very strange things in their energy body through implants and things.
Right.
So,
right. All hyperdimensional. Some of them, most of them, may be just hologram, projections or something in people's mind, but they leave physical traces and psychic traces.
Yeah, there was one person who corresponded with me that she would have, she would be taken monthly, a ritual type setting, but it appeared to be astral, although it could have been physical. It probably was physical, where she would be set on an altar, and these beautiful Nordic type beings, like 12 of them, would surround her. And they would take her every time she had her menses, and then they would feed off her blood and her energy. And they looked like beautiful Nordics. But they also had a light being type of appearance that was beautiful, that they would look like a good being. But in actuality, what I think they were was a type of lux being, which Malonga calls, that could take on a Nordic form, a beautiful Nordic form, and they really just feed on energy, and they can feed on this energy that's in our spine and literally take it, or feed off the blood essence energy. Some beings that actually can take a beautiful form, and you think that they're positive beings, and they're really just part of this charade.
Right.
So I never assume anything anymore. You just never know until you know their frequency and you test them and observe their interactions.
And they can shapeshift and morph into anything, really. So most of the time. So there's behavioral trickery. There's some pheromones and odors, some side effects, sabotage of the soulmate. What part do karmic connections play, like in implants, telepathy, mind corruption, and all this? Somebody, a listener is asking now, can it come into this control, this parasitic control in the phone, text, AI, or something? Like the Pokemon Go experiment by the CIA. It was, to me, it was a total mind control, energy harvesting experiment. The CIA was behind it.
That wouldn't surprise me. I do think technologies have a way to directly link into the mind. There's people who can telepathically link in with the computer and with their phone. Right. That has been going on for a number of years, actually. So I think their technologies are hacking in directly into our dreams. In fact, I will say one person, there's many people I talk to, but somebody who was very sensitive, they just recently got a smartphone, and then they started using the smartphone, and then their dreams dramatically changed into having, let's say, more dream hacks. And more unusual type of dream. It's almost like it's an overlay of dream reality in your consciousness when you're imbued with certain frequencies. So you only know when you're out of the frequencies and how you feel. So I think that now, I mean, so much of our society, we're in a frequency soup, so that we're on direct subconscious hack now, where, even watching television and with plasma screen TVs, it could cause you to have your consciousness change. And I even noticed this when I went on meditation retreats, or in the early days when we had dial-up computer, and if I left my computer on without just turning off the computer, my consciousness, it would be like a fuzzy interference pattern, but when the computer was turned off, it would be like this still vacuum. And there was like a difference between how my consciousness felt when the computer was on versus the computer off. Or how you feel if you're way out in the country, away from a cell phone tower or frequencies, and you meditate in nature, or out on a ship or something, out in the ocean, whatever, compared to, let's say, in a normal environment, your dreams change, your meditation practice may change, and you'll only know once you get out of that to know how it's affecting your consciousness. So.
Right. And television shows are basically, and movies, are basically inducing all types of emotions and reactive viewers, and the same thing with sports events and fear, indoctrinating news programs and warmongering, propaganda and false flags, and it seems like we're totally run by psychopaths, and if people don't realize or acknowledge that we're being run by psychopaths, and the worst part is that they all seem to have the Stockholm syndrome, because they think they have the choice. It's a total illusion, the choice to pick their own psychopaths to run them.
Yeah, it kind of brings me back to a dream that I had where in the dream I was noticing with several others that they were resetting the time loop over and over again. And it was like, uh-oh, did you just notice that? Mm-hmm. And that's when they start tweaking stuff, but usually you don't notice it. And then in the dream, like the same person who remembered, then they forgot the next time. And then they called the other people crazy, like, I didn't notice that, you're crazy. So in the dream, some woman says, well, yeah, for the people who are waking up and noticing these things, we have to put them into containment. And then for the ones who are not aware and haven't woken up, we put them on the freedom train. And I don't know if you've read any of the MK Ultra Monarch programming literature. Fritz Brinkmeyer, Kathy O'Brien, Bryce Taylor. But one of the things that was brought up in one of those experiences was what they called the freedom train. And the freedom train was basically a reversal phrase or name for people who were under MK Ultra, maybe Monarch programming, but they were already programmed. So in the dream, basically the message was for those who are on the freedom train, if they're already under mind control and it's a self-regulating system, they're going to stay that way because they self-regulate their own mind control. But the other ones, they're the ones who have to be watched closely like a hawk, and so they try to keep them contained so that they don't do as much damage. So they're always trying to tweak and interfere with the people who are not responding like the majority. Mm-hmm. So I think the majority are actually more easily manipulated and mind controlled, and they really don't notice anything going wrong. They may not notice. In fact, this whole psychopathology field is very, very revealing, and I think there are efforts by some of the powers that be to try to keep a lid on that. Mm-hmm. In terms of what we're discovering with the narcissistic abuse and recovery and the psychopathology and people who are in recovery programs, because basically we know that there's a lot of psychopaths, right? And they don't change. And many of them are in high positions of power and CEOs of corporations, you name it, politicians here and there, so that, they want to keep a lid on it. They want to monopolize their control, so they really don't want us to know too much about psychopathology. So they're going to tweak the psychology books and what the psychotherapists do. They'll try to make them crazy or misidentify it so that you don't really do anything about it when you come across it. So, for an example, my friend who went to this conference recently, a UFO conference, mm-hmm. and he talked to a UFO hypno-regressionist and asked them about, well, are you running across any of the ritual abuse histories of the MK Ultra? And they're like, oh, well, no, I really think that's false memory syndrome. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Somebody at a UFO conference, and they're a hypno-regressionist working with abductees, and they haven't run across that yet, and they still believe it's all false memory syndrome? That's a program from the friggin' 80s and 90s that was implemented.
Declassified recently, finally, at last,
But
by the CIA, but nobody gives a damn about it.
I mean, so, and these people were like, oh, you have to really kind of see it as positive, and there's really no such thing as, the ritual abuse, it's all false memory, and so they're not making the real connections. And the real connections was this: it's a huge frigging mind control project, huge spiritual control, interdimensional interference, with psychopaths running these things to make you think all this other shit's happening. And it's really just a complete spin-controlled story. I mean, a lot of the space program is spin-controlled to a certain extent. And I think that when someone neglects the reality that many of the people in these projects, secret space program, whatever you want to call it, they have MK Ultra histories, which almost always, in every case, has some form of ritual abuse and sexual abuse and systematic trauma for the specific purpose of fracturing and dissociating and creating alternate personalities that can be controlled and programmed and manipulated through whatever programming, including sexual abuse. So sexual abuse is the #1 control system for MK Ultra.
Right.
Okay,
Right.
and ritual abuse.
We
If people are caught with the core issues, they're acting out the programs.
Right,
Okay.
and we can see that happening with all the actors in show business and popular singers and so forth, like Beyonce, Katy Perry, Lady Gaga, and others, Justin Bieber, and so many, like the those abused children, maybe Johnny Depp is part of it too. We can see the stories all over, and actually Hollywood and Intel are working together, and they're disclosing what they're doing to us, but nobody wants to believe it. They see it as fiction. Like in movies like The Adjustment Bureau or Matrix or The Truman Show or
Right,
Ascending
exactly.
Jupiter and so forth. There's so many movies disclosing things, and people, it's just like a way to say we're not violating your free will. Your consent is being obtained that way.
Yeah, well, that's what I call the agreement of entrapment that becomes normalized, even in business practices. That there's a type of, and I think it's a rigged game in terms of problem, reaction, solution that's created, so they can exploit and create agreements of entrapment to pull you into their game, so that you can be easy prey for their feeding and stay in their trap, so they feed on you. I mean, that's why Malanga, his work was so good, because he got it down to the absolute. This is what's happening. This is how it's happening. This is the parasite. Blah 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 blah. But people don't get that we are being deceived. But they will show it in movies, like even TV shows, and there's different ones coming out on Netflix. I was going to mention the Jessica Jones series. There was a few others, like the Agent Shield. There were like MyLab Secret Space Program stuff, but they always tweak it to make it look like it's a little bit of this instead of like what it really is. But it's at least showing you, how they're telling you. But you have to be able to know the symbols and how they reveal things, so that you don't get caught up in. There's more and more subtle levels of control, which we realize. And so when you understand, well, how will they get you to agree with something without you knowing it? So sometimes your silence is your agreement of entrapment. Right. Or you're signing on, let's say with a military-industrial complex job, where you're signing a confidentiality agreement. What are you really signing? Okay, what's the fine line there? Are you really signing away your kids to be used in a mind control project because that corporation is completely taken over by the high-level occult groups running it? And that's a question you need to ask, because I think many people who are in these programs, they ended up having high-level Freemason family members who basically signed them away through the blood oaths they took in that secret society, or through the corporations they were working for, because they were already under control. So, which brings me back to something that I didn't get to mention. When you said Nazi, how everything is really from the Nazi paperclip in that era, that they really won the war, but they went underground, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
Well, someone brought me some material from a researcher. I think it was Walter Bosley. I don't know if that's his name, but they basically made some connections that these secret Nazi UFOs and things actually predated Nazi Germany, and they predated back into the late 1800s and early 1900s through some occult spiritualist groups and scientists who created some of these airships, like the airship of 1897, and some of the later prototypes being used that had gone underground even before Germany became a country. So it was actually Prussia and some of these other Europeans who got into contact with people in California were involved in, let's say, spiritualism and the early space program and aerospace airship stuff. And so what I'm thinking is that they've targeted certain groups and spiritualist families that had abilities, and then they did research and they got them involved in secret programs, which actually is part of what happened in Nazi Germany and went underground through paperclip and all of that. So I think this has been going on a very, very long time. Longer than what you think.
Oh yeah. Even back to ancient Egypt. They used to break, fragment your ego and do some mind control rituals and abuse and to get your, total control of your soul. I mean, that goes back to the ancient secret societies in Sumer. So
that strategy they've been doing that since ancient times, and
right.
There's some people who are ritual abuse survivors talking about that. Like Alyssa E. has some really good books on that. Beyond Life and MK Ultra and her family and the occult connection. And I think, when you study some of these ritual abuse people who are surviving and have done a lot of their healing work, you can get a lot of clues that you wouldn't get from just studying, let's say, an alien abductee who's having all these experiences with these aliens and the hybrid thing. I think you learn a lot from people who are from ancient bloodlines where this thing's been going on for thousands of years. And if they could wake up and, tell their stories, you can get the connections. But most people can't get to that level of recovery, or they don't end up speaking at conferences. Like the UFO conference I mentioned, the one that I thought was like all mind-controlled social engineering. And some of the MK Ultra people who talk about mind control are the ones that are more likely to come up with the more truthful elements, if you ask me, which is I really don't frequent UFO conferences anymore. I don't have patience for it because I see that the same thing that was happening in the 90s is still happening today, if not worse.
Right.
It surprises me. It's like, oh my God, why are they doing the same thing? Like, why would at this conference most people are age 40 or younger? Therefore, they haven't had the maturity to be able to study their own life and the phenomena. And, the researchers, it's the popular opinion. So the ones who get the popular opinion are the ones that be chosen because they bring in more of the people. But if you see that at least 2/3 of the people are easily mind controlled.
Right.
And this number is actually, why I'm using the 2/3, is similar to what the ancient Gnostics found out about, let's say, the types of humans, the types of souls. How there was like 3 different types of humans with different types of souls, and different types of awareness and behaviors and energetic signatures. And this is similar to what Dr. Corrado Malanga found in his work with abductees, where he would speak to what he called the soul component or the anima component, and came to find out that the aliens are only after certain people, the ones who have that component, because not everybody has that frequency where the human genetic container is not coupled with the human soul frequency, and that was only happening to between 20 and 25% of the population have the complete soul frequency in the body. So it's telling you that there's a good 2/3 that are not of that essence, that are easily manipulated and controlled, because it's not fully embodied in their genetics, because their soul is actually not compatible, so it stays behind in another dimension or it's absent. And even the ancient Gnostics, they knew that, wait a minute, there's people that they called the clay people, the Hylics, and the psychics, which was like a mixture of clay and spirit, and the ones that had the more spiritual essence where they remembered things and they had more of those qualities of remembrance. And so even then they knew that was a very, very dangerous, that's a very dangerous thing. I mean, that creates all kinds of questions. Like, wait a minute, you mean not everybody has a soul, basically? Is that what's going on? You have to ask the question, why?
Right.
Some people are just so stupid. I mean, I hate to say it, but how come some people they're just not aware and they'll never get it? And like, it makes you wonder if there's something really wrong here.
Yeah, there's a basic deceptive veil in front of them, and even if you show them proof in the material world, they won't believe it. You know, it's this cognitive dissonance, and that's the problem. How does the attachment process happen? You know, in a paranormal relationship, you know, like between a human and, well, we talked about the organic portals. Maybe that's what you forgot to mention. The ones that don't vibrate high, or you know, and don't have a full access to their soul. You were
yeah, I mean, it happens. I mean, that's something that we've noticed a long time ago, where there were some that seemed to be easily manipulated by these dark forces, and they didn't seem to have an awareness of their own issues. And it could be just because they haven't healed all their issues and come to an awareness of their own being. And so they're kind of on automaton, like sometimes people who get triggered, sometimes they're behaving in this subconscious, automatic, unconscious way. And they will be maybe more easily taken over by the entities or whatever programming.
Right.
There's some who are actually literally portals, and that's all they are.
Right. And in the relationship romantic relationship between Dracos or winged dragon, whatever you call it, in the attachment process, there's a huge sexual energy being drawn, an emotional sexual energy being drawn from those parasitic relationships. You know, I've had a Draco lady who confirmed that to me yesterday by email, so I can attest to that. And so they stage dreams, scenarios, astral dreamscape scenarios. How do they get to this? Because in one article you sent me, it says that the human orgasm is used as a means to reinforce programming. You know, and they're usually taken to underground military bases, and they can learn from their own sexual fantasies, and this is how the Draco usually target those who have innate metaphysical abilities, but also this strong sexual energy they feed off of.
Well, they want people who have more energy in general, so if they can harvest that and get someone to compulsively masturbate or to have sex with those who are the mediators to give the energy away, then they would want that. So they can manipulate the dreamscape, and there's different ways that can be done to try to get someone to get all aroused. But I think there's also implants that help tweak that or can cause that to happen, or the entities, if the parasite's inside the body, then they can, you know, basically milk that chakra or create that imagery and just, you know, make you be over sexual. Although there's aspects of programming that can take place in other ways that people from satanic ritual abuse have reported, where, I mean, this is something that I don't think I wrote about it yet, but it's going to be in my book, next book.
Okay.
But, you know, it's well known amongst, let's say, some deliverance ministers who also do ritual abuse therapy with people, and they do maybe deliverance, and they, as a result of doing the therapy and finding out what happened in the traumas, the early sexual traumas is often the way that not only they were split and dissociated to tap into their soul power, but sometimes they will put programming in during that sexual rape or sodomy, or sometimes during orgasm, depending on the person. And so they can just directly link in programming on a subconscious level through the sex, through the sexual abuse.
Right.
So it depends on how it's used, you know.
Right. Yeah, and they're feeding off of society's emotional nature, but also in the mind programming throughout organized religion, schools, media, government, so and sexual behavior. And this is a new text that's come up in the ministry of in France of the health ministry or something, and they want to implement that in kindergarten and schools for little children to allow adults to guide them into how to pleasure themselves from 0 to 4 years old. Can you imagine that? It's just basically legalizing pedophile rings and pedophile adults just managing those little kids. It's just the parents. Are the parents going to let that happen, or it's just you wonder, sometimes.
But that's an example of the invasiveness of the parasite predator, and also the normalization of allowing more and more perversions and let's say corruption in business and dysfunctional behaviors in relationships. As time goes on, I mean, I've noticed this even in my lifetime, that there's more of a normalization of corruption and lying and psychopathology and indiscriminate sexual behavior, predations, lying. I mean, even let's say getting a cellular phone, and you have to sign for the package, and then they tell you this and that, and they market it in a certain way. Then they turn around and then just make you do an agreement for 2 years while you get put on all these telemarketer lists, and then you start getting all these horrible telemarketing calls, and then you want to quit doing this because you don't like what they're doing, and then you have to go through this whole thing just to not do it anymore. And basically it's an agreement of entrapment, and they've normalized so much corruption, so much fraud, that they actually think it's normal, and they get people just to follow the orders to do their job, and they're just working on their computer and following orders, and they don't even care about customer service or user-friendly customer service. They just normalize the complete and utter fraud, right, and the loss and the cheating. Oh, that's just an oversight, and oh, that's just what we do, and they normalize it. And then people don't know that you have to do this for a job, like working for a bank, and then you have to charge these customers all these late fees, but then they do it on purpose so that the check doesn't go through, so you get the late fee. And they do it just to rip you off, and then you got to make excuses to the customer for all the lying and the cheating the bank is doing.
Yes,
and then you have to
feel guilty and really bad inside, So they feed off of that because these entities, they've created and maintain a system of control that maximizes the energy output of humanity. That was what you call loosh, I think, right? The expression LOOSH. Right.
It's learning how not to be a loosh.
Right.
to their system, and that's really, what I'm learning, trying to help my clients is to how learn how to set boundaries, so that we're not our energy is not being used to help promote their corruption and their bullshit reality, which is basically an enslavement system, and how to use our energy effectively in a way where we don't get abused and we create what we want, and it's really learning how to go back to the identification factor of how to identify when these parasite energies and these organic portal people all of a sudden start doing things, and sometimes they do it in waves and in clusters, where you know that you're being hit. A lot of times it happens on ritual dates. Things will happen full moon, new moon, certain moon phases, and it tends to happen when there's actually rituals being done. And I've noticed this with clients where they'll have all these experiences, and it will happen during ritual dates, and or when they'll be suddenly assailed with many emails, many phone calls, many dramas, with similar energies and people suddenly coming up to pull you into their game of drama, which is a feeding frenzy. And these people may not know how they're being used, and you don't want to blame them and judge them. It's just that you start observing these things and how they happen in waves and clusters, and it's just learning how to stand back and not engage in a way where you don't get pulled in and get your energy just completely used up by these organic portals and however this game is being played, and learning what the game is.
Right. Same thing with false flags. People who don't see, who can't identify one single false flag. They always happen at the same dates. Like 322, 9/11, 11 something. There's always a 7 or 11 or 7/11 in the date. Or 322 is like the skulls and bones number. It's all satanic rituals and dates and calendars, and people don't know anything about occultism, and they don't think it exists, and we're only like a piece of meat on two legs, and we're just born to reproduce and consume and work and die happily with all kinds of stress triggered cancers and diseases. Anyway, it's a happy life here. We can make it happier though. Let's talk about trauma healing and what we can do to integrate or clear out, break down this parasitic situation all around us, actually. Like release, spirit releasement, the experiences. What can you tell us about that? Clearing all this false soul programming, and there's got to be methods that you've come up with.
I believe now that there's ways to do this in a more organic way, where if we can be fully present with someone in a way that it helps them connect with their feelings and connect with the more authentic part of themselves, I like to help facilitate that process so they self-discover and self-realize in whatever that takes. So sometimes it's hypnotic regression or guiding them through so that they can bypass what they're doing compulsively to actually avoid, because many people have what I call the psychological defenses or the booby trap programming or the interference factors, which actually prevents them from going deep enough to get to the core origin or the core wounds or the core causes of what's happening in their life that they don't want to happen anymore. So you have to go deep sometimes, but some people, you have to assess, are they ready? Are they ready to look at themselves and to discover, are they ready to drop illusions or behaviors which are actually opening doors over and over again for them to be linked into by these predators? And sometimes it's because the way they're living, the way they're relating, what they're believing. So every person's different. But if you can bypass some of the conscious mind that is the psychological defenses, then go deeper to, let's say, in Malanga's work, he says accessing directly the soul component of consciousness, which would be the anima that exists in the eternal now. And if we can access that part of ourselves or themselves, then we can reconnect with awareness and with greater willpower to move things out of the reality that they no longer want or need. Although sometimes people need things in order to learn and experience, and you can't take that away from them. Mm-hmm. So really, not everybody's ready to release and to see what's there or what's not there. So really, I take things on an intuitive basis, where someone comes with presenting symptoms of what's happening, and then I get a feel for what's happening and where they may need to do some more self-inquiry and finding out about their history and what they're feeling and what they're believing and how we might go about that in a way to clear out things. But they have to be ready for it. They have to actually be ready to open up in the awareness process. And sometimes that means being in a safer place or being in a different relationship sometimes. Mm-hmm. Sometimes just by nature of the family they're in or the relationship they're in, that acts as a saboteur.
Right.
And so as long as they're, let's say, drinking alcohol every night and numbing out, they're never going to get to their core feelings because those are being numbed out by the addiction. So a lot of times those people, they may have interference, but you can't do anything for them because they're holding on to an addiction that actually creates their own victimization. So,
but are we living in a trickle-down society? Like there's always like maybe a family member or a relative or close friends or workmate that has those addictions or that draws others into his parasitic world, you know.
Yes, absolutely. Like it's the social circle sometimes.
Right.
Doing and what we're believing, what we're eating, what we're getting in our energy field. I mean, there's a lot of people, and I think this happens, I don't know, maybe this happens more with women or older women, that they're afraid to be alone.
Mm-hmm.
And so they normalize just having a partner, even though they're not maybe compatible on different levels, and then they're doting over them, and they're like, you know, a completely dysfunctional person, and then they're getting their field completely infected and eaten by like a predator, or who's like, why are they with this person? Just because they're so afraid of being alone, and then they think that, well, that's just how it is, that's just how they are, because they grew up thinking that they need to dote on this particular alcoholic who's just not dealing with their shit. Excuse my French, but it's they normalize being in dysfunctional relationships just so they can feel like everybody else and not be alone because they're afraid of being alone or they're afraid of facing themselves.
Right.
So you have to ask the question: why are you still in a job that's ripping people off, or why are they still in the sex industry? Or why are they still selling drugs? Or why are they still like having sex with a black magician? You know what I mean?
It's basically like you said, social engineering. It's just it looks like most of the masses are not happy at what they're doing, and it's sort of like mass slavery and psychic slavery. You know, it's just so people are drawn into doing unhappy things just for survival purposes. To put food on their table, and that's how society has been constructed for centuries. You know, and we have the banksters today that are basically raising havoc on international affairs, on people's daily lives, and it's just very everyday lives, and that's what they're doing in politics, and this whole system is based upon trauma. So we need to.
It's a rigged system. I would definitely say it's a rigged system, and you're lucky enough to even discover how it works and how the game is played.
Right.
So by the time you get to that place, oftentimes you have to go quiet. Sometimes you have to just be quiet about what you know, so that you can navigate in a way where you can still make a living, and you don't have to deal with being thrown out on the streets, or have something your parents or whatever happen. I mean, a lot of bad things can happen to people who know too much, or they speak too loudly, or they influence too many people, which is why, some people in the media, if they, positively affect too many people or wake too many people up, they get taken out.
Right.
So,
yeah,
so that's why, I'm thinking that the majority rule, which is basically the bell curve, right? What's in the bell curve? And the majority rule tend to be those who are mind-controlled or presenting the spin-controlled version that the predators want you to see, so that you really don't see what the truth is. So when you talk about majority rule in politics, what does it really mean? It just means the dumb people took over.
Right.
So
Right.
so you have to learn how to navigate the system, understanding that the majority rule is always going to be those who really haven't quite woken up yet, and do what you can to do the best you can to help as many people you can in a way that you still remain safe, and just accept the fact that some people need more to wake up than others, and sometimes you just have to allow things to take their course, like being with the Tao, and just allowing things to move in the way that they need to move, and you just like learning how to be a yogi and work in a spontaneous fashion with what you know, and you're kind of quiet. You're not like in the mainstream, right? They'll never be the popular opinion. People who speak the real truth will never ever be out there making a popular opinion. I can guarantee you.
Right, that's for sure.
If they're taken out, they're going to be spin controlled, or they're going to be tweaked here and there, or they'll have technical issues. They'll never get on the air.
We'll never become rock stars or politicians, so that's a good thing.
Yeah,
I don't want this. But basically keeping ourselves clean psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, doing some healing work, and understanding our own history is helpful, right?
there's nothing like the value of having even one good friend. And I always go back to really appreciating and honoring the people before me who had helped me in my own discovery process, like Barbara Bartholic, Karla Turner, James Bartley, and the friends that I learned these things with, and the friends that I have today. And they're a small handful, but I'm so grateful that I'm able to have genuine, authentic friends to be with and to learn with and to honor, so that we can continue and not having to be so isolated. Because probably one of the biggest issues that people come to me for is that they're learning and they're excited about learning, but man, they're isolated and they feel alone, and they can't, in their own communities, they have a really hard time finding their own kind to have a discussion with. And they would like to, but they're living a secret life or a double life, and they can't quite say the whole truth. They just kind of have to play the game, and there's a lot of loneliness and there's a lot of isolation. So whenever we can be that for one another, and we can be that listening board or be truly present for someone is a really great gift. And just be that. If we can be that for others, then that's good.
I think
there's probably people in our community who are probably feeling the same way, and they just don't know it. They just kind of don't know where to go or how to bring this subject up without being ousted or being considered crazy.
Right. I saw this false soul clearing programming document on your website. I think it's the Declaration of Non-Consent for Interference. Is that on your website, right?
Yes, I got two of them. One of them's a statement of non-consent, or I don't know. I have a statement. Basically, it's stating my case so that they don't have my permission or agreement of entrapment to interfere.
Right.
Or there's consequences, because I'm not giving them permission for me to enter their game, and I'm letting them know, right? So there's also something that even if we can do this by speaking out loud in our daily intentions or prayers or with a group, because whenever we do something, you know how they say if you pray with two or more people, it's much more powerful.
Right.
And I think there's a true spiritual truth to that. And so we can, let's say, read a declaration of intent together that we do not consent to being invaded or exploited, or our silence does not mean that we agree to these things, and you basically name them. And even doing this with intention with another person or out loud, you're making it known, even from these other dimension levels, that I will not agree to being pulled into your game. I know this game, and I'm not giving you permission to invade upon my reality or myself or whatever.
Right.
And I think just making it conscious is a way to say no, because the number one reason why so many of us feel victimized in one way or another, and nobody likes to be a victim, but oftentimes we are, just in this world, the way the world is to learn how to set appropriate boundaries, and knowing all the fine subtleties of what it means to be able to maintain your energetic boundaries. Right. And so the declaration is one way to state your boundaries and to respect your boundaries, because the more you have respect for your truth and your spirit, the less you're going to allow people to invade your space, and learn how to set boundaries, learn how to communicate effectively and compassionately, but with assertiveness, so that you don't get basically manipulated by whoever, whatever, and learn how to make that happen. So for me, the learning is boundaries, and it's communication, and it's interaction with people. So it's learning how to, it's basically relearning to not be a victim in all the ways that, how we grow up. Sometimes we're victims and we don't know it, because that's what we've been taught. So how not to be a victim in a way where we're respecting ourselves, but we're still respecting the other person, without having to be violent or having to make a big show of it or be angry all the time. And the boundaries is like the hugest learning that we can do to be safe and not to be predated upon.
Right. And the boundaries, are important. And the declaration is a self-declaration, because last month I interviewed Robert Stanley, whom you may know, and he said that prayer, the word pray is basically calling for predators. You're becoming a prey. When you pray on behalf of some type of avatar or god or external guide from yourself. You're just making yourself a prey for the predator. That's what
That's linguistics is a way of controlling the consciousness of the energy, and that's another form of control, which goes back to our ancient past, to how these beings actually created language and linguistics in ways that made us program ourselves and keep self-programming ourselves over and over again, and then not knowing how we just got programmed through language. So in a meditation practice, it's good to release thoughts and conceptual thinking and go into a stillness and being subject and object at the same time. And if you can do that in a kind of neutral space, then you can observe more clearly how all this takes place. And so being in silence is a really good way to tap into your own beingness. And I think it's really when you truly know and remember who you are, that's when you tap into your power. Although I think praying, it's kind of like, I think it helps when we set our intentions together for the greater goodness, and that there is a higher power. There definitely is a higher power, or a collective kind of higher power. There's nothing wrong with that, because there's a certain element of what I believe in when we have a type of humility and virtue and ethics that gives us power. It gives us spiritual power.
Right.
As long as we have realization of who we really are. So, because egotism is basically, that's when the predator mindset takes you over, and then that's another game.
Right. Right. Yeah, their game is to keep us weak, so we need to raise our vibration, so that we're unattainable, and we're on our path to gain our sovereignty back and free will. But at least we have the illusion of free will so far within the matrix. Can you tell us a couple of words about angelic intervention? I know that you've written an article about it. In NDEs and near-death experiences and spirit guides, there are actual angelic interventions inside this matrix.
It does happen. I mean, I've had many people report these things, including my own life. So, there are occasions when there are beings who would definitely help us. They may not necessarily take the form of the beings with the wings. They may take different forms. They may take a human form. They may appear physically to do something. And then some people think maybe it's part of our own being, our own higher self coming back through time to intervene in a certain moment so that you don't actually get killed in a car crash or something, where really strange things happen that can't be explained. So I think those things actually do happen. I don't want to judge every single one of them as being a false alien or whatever, because you only know when it happens. So
right. Yeah, and so basically tell us about your next book, and then I'll ask you one last question to close us off.
My book project, working with a colleague, Laura Leno. We're working on one together, so I don't want to say too much about it because it's going to be a lot of material, a lot of things that we've learned, including personal experience and other things. And so I don't really have permission to speak on all of that. It's just that I've been working on it for a while, and I'm looking forward to getting that done. And it's taking a lot of my time and energy, so I'm not spending as much time doing articles or speaking engagements and kind of pulling back from Facebook. So it just takes a lot of energy and focus to do a writing project.
Right. Have you come across benevolent beings coming from other dimensions, or I would say like maybe benevolent ETs, or highly advanced ETs?
I have. I mean, I've had beings interfere, come in a benevolent way where they helped me. It's like an angelic thing, and then I had some appear in what appeared like dreams, but they were really other dimensional beings honoring me because of some thing. and of a whole different race that looks completely different and communicating differently in a way that was benevolent and joyful. Mm-hmm. And so I believe that there are good beings who every now and then they'll come and they'll, honor you or say something, and most of the time they stay hidden. There's really no reason to get all worked up about it, but I think there are benevolent beings out there, and they're not all negative. Mm-hmm. Just, hey, if there's good people like us, there must be good beings elsewhere.
Right. 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 Exactly. So, what's your take on this current world situation, the big picture in regards to this spiritual warfare going on here? There's this big AI transhuman agenda versus this organic sovereignty and soul healing and free will liberation that we're trying to work towards. Where do you think we're heading to in the short term on Earth?
I would like to believe we're heading towards many more people waking up so that we can get to the point of making a positive change before the usual civilization reset things occur, which have happened in our past over and over again. Okay. Like a Tower of Babel thing, and what happens in a reset. We go back to the Stone Age and we forget.
Right.
And we don't want to have to go to a reset where we forget and we still get manipulated by the same game or get spun off in another timeline and it's the same game. Right. So I'm hoping that there's going to be an end to this cycle so that the reset manipulations of the artificial timelines and the exploitation by the predatorial ones will stop. It will stop. But there's no way of really knowing how it's going to play out. I'm hoping that it will play out so it stops and something else happens that's actually a big universal jump on an overall scale that's different from what's ever happened before. And that's what some people are believing. That's not just going to be another reset. There's going to be something that's completely different that's going to take place that has to do with this wave coming and the stopping of all the artificial timelines and the relooping. And there's going to be an end to the recyclement altogether. It's going to be a whole different thing.
It looks like we're getting closer to this end of time cycle, ending line, because we see all those fake or mind control program, secret space program whistleblowers, like Corey Good, William Tompkins, Michael Sella, David Wilcox and stuff, and they look like they're totally intel, and there's some truth in it, in their speech, and there's it's all made up with maybe 90% of fake disclosure and false hopes basically, and they're dragging so much attention, and people looking for the truth seekers. What do you think the mind control is playing out towards what kind of agenda is playing out in the background with all those whistleblowers from the secret space programs?
It's hard to say. I think that people only know when they remember on a deep, deep level who they are. Mm-hmm. This can only happen through healing, trauma resolution, and integration, which is a lot of gut-wrenching therapy and stuff that most of us have a really hard time doing or wanting to do. Mm-hmm. And it's not going to be the popular opinion. It's going to be people who don't really make a lot of big headlines that are more likely to have a more accurate picture, in my view. It's a big question, what's happening. I think that if there are predators who want to take advantage of us as a resource, they will want to put us in a kind of passivity programming and get us to believe something so that it's not a threat. So, so we won't know that we've been had, and we won't know to set boundaries because we won't have the perception to know what they're doing and what their intentions are and who they really are. So the only way to know that is to know ourselves, so we can have the purity of perception in our spirit to know exactly who they are and what their intentions are and what they're hiding and what their agenda is, because you see right through them. And so the only way to do that is to go deep into our own self-recovery integration process and to like spiritual ethics and truth. It's like when you get to that place, it is a realization of beingness that starts just coming, manifesting. So the more you work on yourself, the more purely you can perceive. But there's always some uncertainty, and that's part of being human, is that we can't always perceive with, quote, 6 senses. Sometimes we only can work with the 5, and we have to look at the patterns and observe the dynamics of the probability of certain things happening. And so that's all I can say. It says we have to know ourselves, and that's the only way to know.
Right. And we don't know. Maybe we're just avatars of ourselves, our true selves, down here, and maybe connecting with our real higher self outside of this matrix, artificial matrix, is a way to find all the answers, find out all the answers, but it feels like there's two humanities parting ways these days. Like there's a bigger gap every
For the
day.
transhuman to become,
Right.
then the more organic that awakens to the original, let's say the original blueprint of what we are, and then the ones that are going into the program of being more and more controlled by the transhumanism and the parasitism agenda, which Dr. Malanga basically talked about the end game. The end game of the aliens' agenda, if they're successful, is to successfully genetically modify the human DNA in the vehicle, in the body, to have enough of the, quote, alien genetics with enough of the human genetics to make sure that the human soul still stays embodied while the mind and the spirit is completely controlled by the alien consciousness, so that they're just using the higher essence as a battery, but has completely taken over the will of the anima, the soul. And that's not good, because if you have something else taking over that means possession. That means a possession agenda of not very smart, dumb, and the destruction of humanity, and the complete enslavement of the human soul. So right now we still have the option of getting out, but if their agenda is complete and people stay dummied down and don't do anything, then it's basically the door is closed. And that's what the danger is, I think, with this whole AI and the end of the cycle. That I think that some of the people who knew, maybe, I'm not going to say Jesus, but maybe if they looked ahead, they saw the end of the cycle, that we can go 2 ways. We can go with the Spirit's truth and the original essence, organic essence, and you can go towards you get harvested in their program and you go through the second death. Because harvesting is the second death. And you get consumed by that, whatever that is, and you lose all your consciousness, but have your essence be completely consumed by that hive-minded AI or whatever it is. And so it's like a second death. So we are entering the possibility of entering a second death if you get harvested. So you need to know what that means. And that's actually something that I'm really not at liberty to know more about. But maybe you can talk to my colleague and she might be able to explain more of what she feels that's about.
Right.
And the whole matrix thing and the AI and how that's taking place, and what is the danger of what's happening now, and why we really need to wake up, because we don't want to be lulled to sleep to be harvested for the second death, because it's just not like you're going to be recycled and have another incarnation. It's like, if it's true, it's the end, the end game of end games.
Right. So a reset with no memories whatsoever left behind. In hypnosis sessions, regressive hypnosis sessions, you come across a lot of people who are able to connect to their original, genuine, like clean, pure, selves, like beings outside of this matrix. Sometimes.
That can happen. That's good. And I think all you have to do is you just have to desire it, and you have to want it. And as long as that's there and there's a kind of a purity, and you're being led by that, opportunities will open up and you will be able to be on that path. It's the ego that gets in the way, and if you let the parasites and the programming and you want to be popular or the popular opinion, and then you forego the purity of your spirit, and then something else takes over. The copycat or contact parasite takes over the consciousness. I mean, I see that happening a lot, like on Facebook, which is pretty scary. It's like normalizing a lot of this archontic copycat parasite behavior.
Right.
So,
well,
but I don't mean to paint a negative picture. I still believe there's lots of hope, and we wouldn't be talking unless there was hope, right?
Right, exactly. Well, let's take advantage of it. The internet is not totally under control yet. Because there's no rules on YouTube and so forth that you may know about. That a couple of articles that came out recently, and they want new regulations on the advertisers and the sponsors for YouTube channels, and they're boycotting. Basically, the big companies are boycotting YouTube for sponsoring, so that the little YouTube channels who are sometimes truth seekers and benevolent whistleblowers are not going to be able to make any dime out of the YouTube clicks and sponsor clicks. So it's a way to just pin down dissent, basically.
I really think it's AI is controlling more and more in an automated fashion, which means we have to have a call back to humanity and compassion and interpersonal relation and communications and authentic organic beingness, so that we never let the computer override what we want.
Right.
And don't let the computers take you over, the technology. And if we want to have organic get together and do music and have no cell phones present, we need to honor that. We need to honor each other for our organic beingness, and that needs to be number one.
Right. A return to nature and organic, natural things, and basically work on building some joy and happiness within us, within ourselves, and around us, so that they will hate that the archons. They don't feed off the positive energies.
Yeah, so I guess that's about it, really. Pretty much covered a lot.
Yeah, I think so too. And really, a big thank you, and so much information and such actually a pretty extensive interview that I took up a lot of your time, and really thank you so much, Eve. It was great seeing you again and having you cover all those topics, and good luck with the new book. And we hope to see you again soon, and I'll try to actually connect with your colleague and talk about AI sometime in the near future. And thank you so much, Eve. Goodbye, everybody, and we'll see you next month with we don't have a definite date yet, but our next guest, I know who it's going to be. It's going to be David Icke. So he's coming to Paris. He's coming to Paris in September. So yeah. So this is our next guest next month. Thank you, Eve.
Thank you so much.
We'll see you soon. Take care. Bye.